What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Jeffrey Jim from Charismatic Visuals, and today we are going to talk about the Samyang 85mm 1.4. It's right over here. I have to thank Transcontinenta for sending me the lens. That's the Dutch importer of the Samyang brand, which is called Rokinon in the US. And they provided me this lens for reviewing and testing out their Samyang tryout program, which I really appreciate. So thank you for that. I'll add a link into the description below. You can find their website over there and their social media as well. So I was looking for 85mm 1.4. That's why I got in contact with them in the first place. I was interested in this Samyang AF 85mm 1.4, and my main purpose with it was for car photography. I've tested it out in certain situations. So I went to an event, I tested it out with my friend's car. I will add his social media as well. It's Mr. Jonkopu Works, and we shot his Mini. I tested it out with a BMW M4, and I also brought it out into Rotterdam. I tested it with my girlfriend. I shot some portraits with it. I shot some cityscapes with it. So I will tell you about my experience with this lens. I don't have a direct comparison with the 85 1.8 or the 85 1.4. That's because I don't have it with me, and I will show you my own experience in my use. So, as I told you, I use this lens for car photography mainly, and after this, I figured out that it suits that kind of stuff really well. I'll come back to you why. We'll start with the build quality. Here we have it, and yeah, you have a plastic lens cap, which is a little bit flimsier than the Sony variants. We have a lens hood, which feels better than the Tamron one over here. It's a quite a long hood. If you add the hood onto the lens, it's quite lengthy and it's quite bulky to carry on. However, the build quality, it feels nice. I didn't have any problems with it in the terms of build quality. It feels heavy, it feels sturdy built, and the aperturing has the nice weight to it. So when you want to focus with it, it feels good, it feels weighty. There is some sort of rubber gasket over here, so I think there is some sort of weather sealing. According to the website, there's also weather sealing in the barrel itself. So we're going to put it onto my camera, which is the A7III. I also tested all my pictures with the A7III. I'm going to take off my Tamron lens and put it onto the Sony. And as you can see, it slides right on. It's a little bit front heavy without the hood even. If you add the hood, this will make the lens quite big into your hands. And with the 77mm thread, you're going to add even more weight to the front. However, I think with the Sony bodies, the full frame bodies at least, it fits perfectly into my hands. I can imagine if you have larger hands that you'll get into trouble in between the grip and the lens itself. So, that's the physical dimension of the lens itself, and as you can see, it's quite a big setup. For me, I wouldn't take this onto a holiday trip or whatever, because this is just too big to carry on as an extra lens. I think this lens is perfect for some sort of situations. Let's say slow portraits or slow events. Car events are not always that rushy. Of course, if you are on a track, then it's a different kind of story. But if you're on a meeting or if you have a photo shoot with a car, you don't have to rely on fast autofocus that much. So I think this lens is quite useful for that kind of situations. If you want to shoot your kid with it or your dog, then it might be a different situation, because the 1.4 aperture makes the depth of field really shallow. And I noticed even when a car arrives to a scene, and when you autofocus, you focus on the car, it loses focus because it's so shallow, and it sort of can't keep up with that kind of situations. However, if you shoot a slow portrait, for example, that wouldn't be a problem. You can rely on the eye autofocus to correctly shoot your portrait, and you can rely on the normal autofocus on solid subjects like a car to take a picture with shallow depth of field. So I also tested the autofocus in dark environments. I also tested with backlit environments, and I noticed that when you have a dark environment or backlit environment, the autofocus will struggle with the eye autofocus or the autofocus in general. Why? Because it's harder to find the exact spot where it should focus on, and when you have a backlit situations, it's harder to detect the contrast between the subject and the backlight. Sometimes if you have a car coming towards you, it's a little bit harder to focus when you have the sun coming from the rear of the car. So it's not always ideal, but I think it hits focus 70 to 80% of the time in that kind of situations. When lighting conditions are great, there's no problem. The lens focuses just right away, and in combination with the A7III, there's nothing to complain about when I have a event on a sunny day or in good lighting for that matter. So why did I choose for a 85mm focal length and a 1.4 to test it out? That's because I love shooting with shallow depth of field, and well, the Tamron 28 to 75 2.8 does a good job in separating some of the background and the subject and the car. It's still not a 1.8 or even a 1.4 aperture, of course. So I was looking for a new lens that suits my shooting style better, and that's this lens, or any 85 1.8 for that matter, 1.4 for that matter, because this lens is a perfect focal length to get not too far away from a car but not too close either. And with that background separation at 1.4, you will get a nice isolated picture. So for car photography, I think this is a good lens because the autofocus is good enough for slow action. It's separating the subject good enough to avoid having too much distraction in the background. And when you're shooting cars, most of the time you are shooting a static subject, unless you are doing a rolling shot, but then I won't do it with an 85 anyway, because an 85 is quite narrow. And in that case, I think the 85mm Samyang is a great option. In terms of image quality, I think it has a slightly faded look to it, which is, you can compare it with film look, and that's nice because the image is soft enough to adjust later on, but sharp enough at the focus point to be sharp when you have edited it in post. So the bokeh of this lens is very creamy. It's a portrait lens in general, and of course I can use it for car photography in that regards because it gives me that same kind of background separation as well. However, because you tend to be closer when you shoot humans or headshots, the bokeh will be even creamier because you're closer to your subject. And that's what I love about this lens. The bokeh is so creamy, it's so smooth. That's why I would buy this lens right away. And speaking of buying this lens starts at, I think, $700 US dollars or euros. That is a good price point for a 1.4 aperture with this autofocus performance. So of course the direct contender is the 85 1.4 in terms of aperture, and you also have the 1.8 from Sony because it's in the same price range. Of those three, which one would I choose? That depends on what budget you have for this kind of lens. If you really want that 1.4 aperture, which I want because the background separation is that little bit more, and for that money I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't go for the 1.8 in that regard, because if you're looking for a 1.4, that's the reason you're going for that certain look which the 1.8 can't give you in this case. So if you compare it to the Sony 85 1.4, that one is a fair bit more expensive, I think around 2.5 times. And for that money, I can't say that the other lens is much better. I haven't tested myself, so according to my findings, it's a personal experience, of course. I've watched reviews as well, of course, from f-stoppers, and that difference in money, I can't really find why you should go for the other one, except for the extra features, except for the autofocus when you need it. So in my user scenarios, I think this lens is a good fit, and it saves you a fair bit amount of money. So how is the chromatic aberration like? Of course, when you shoot wide open at 1.4, there's quite a bit of greenish, purplish, especially greenish tones. However, it's only at the sharpest edges when you have backlit situations. And I think it's quite a good, it handles it quite well. I think if you look at the Sigma, which I'm using right now, the Sigma 30mm 1.4, that one has way more chromatic aberration in terms of shooting wide open. This one doesn't really have it in that regard. And I think that's, for this price point, it's a great option. I think the lens has a certain muted look to it. It allows you to edit it in post. You can add texture, you can add clarity to get some of that dramatic effect back. However, if you do not want that, you can use the image straight out of the camera, or at least straight off the lens, the smoothness of the lens, to create a very dreamy photo. In car photography, I tend to up the texture just a little bit, not too much, because I want to keep the profile of this lens as much as possible. Of course, you want to know the sharpness of this lens at 1.4 aperture. I think it's quite good. I think it could be a tiny bit sharper when you shoot with eye autofocus, but in general, the sharpness is great, even when you shoot with eye autofocus on animals, on humans, or if you do use the autofocus on static subjects. Not sure if it has to do with this example, this particular piece in general, because I think the autofocus could be a little bit sharper. The focus could be a little bit sharper than I'm seeing from this lens. However, if you look at the lens in general, I think the sharpness is good enough, perfect for many photographers. Most of them will not see it unless you go pixel peeping, and for my user scenarios, that's not the case, that's not necessary. So, sharpness, thumbs up. So what are the downsides of this lens? As I told you, sometimes the autofocus will lose track of the subject, and that has to do with the backlighting or the dark environments. Maybe the Sony equivalents will do better. However, I haven't tried that myself, so I cannot say for sure. In general, I think for the price point, this lens, you cannot go wrong with it. It's a perfect lens for static subjects, for example, slower portraits in studios, or when you on a event where you can take more time for shooting cars, for example, or people. It's not really a run and gun lens, of course, because the 85mm is just a tad too tight for that situation. So thank you for watching my video. I also want to, of course, thank Samyang and Transcontinenta for sending me this lens. It's the last day I'm going to have this lens, so I gotta send it back. Would I buy it with my own money? Yes, this lens is definitely a lens that I will buy with my own money, because the price quality ratio is very good, and at 1.4 with that amount of money, there's nothing that really comes close to it. Of course, you can go for the G Master, which is a very good lens overall. However, is it 2.5 times as good? If you speak about the image quality, I don't think so. Of course, if you talk about autofocus and go more into details, then you would notice the difference between this lens and the one from Sony itself. And as I mentioned before, the 85 1.8, it's a good contender if you are deciding in that price range. However, if you're looking for a 1.4, I would definitely go for this one. Of course, the 1.8 is a smaller lens, so if you tend to travel a lot, I can recommend that one as well, and 1.8 isn't a bad aperture at all. Just this one is a little bit smoother, and overall I think if you choose for 1.4, this is the lens to go for. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you like my channel, follow me on Instagram and on YouTube, and you will get updated with new content every day. Thank you and see you next time. Bye bye!